Hi, everyone. Welcome to P&P Live. My name is Brandy. We are just getting set up. We are going to get our live stream running on YouTube and just letting our guest join the event. So give us a couple of seconds. I see everyone logging in. That is wonderful. All right. I think we're ready to get started. So again, if you're just logging in, welcome to P&P Live. My name is Brandy, and I'm a bookseller with the Children and Teens Department. And I just want to thank you for joining us today for this virtual event featuring our picture book, Fatima's Great Outdoors. I have the pleasure of hosting our event this afternoon, and we are delighted to welcome our guest author, Ambreen Tariq, in conversation with Tara Thomas, who is the children's librarian with Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Branch of DC Public Library. Ambreen Tariq is the founder of Brown People Camping, a social media campaign that promotes greater diversity in public lands and outdoors community. Ambreen uses storytelling to share how her life experiences as a Muslim, South Asian American immigrant woman have shaped her love for the outdoors. Ambreen is a full-time federal employee and an ambassador for REI in the Washington, D.C. area. She's also co-founder of Outdoor Muslims, sits on the board of directors of the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, and is an advisory council member of the Sierra Club's Outdoors for All campaign. And Fatima's Great Outdoors is her debut picture book. For today's event, you can ask her a question by clicking on Q&A at the bottom of your screen. And you can also vote for your favorite question by clicking the thumbs up button that will push those questions up to the top of the queue. You can also click on the chat to get your own copy of Fatima's Great Outdoors. So keep an eye out for that. And those of you who did select the complimentary book option will be able to pick those up in the children's room at the Martin Luther King Library branch. So now that we've gotten all of that info out of the way, I'd like to turn this over to Ambreen and Tara. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Brandy. It is such a pleasure today to be interviewing you, Ambreen, because I have been telling everyone that they should read this book. This has become my new favorite picture book. And for someone who was raised going into the outdoors with my parents and having those experiences and continuing to spend time as a nature lover and outdoors, this is just absolutely fabulous on so many levels. And we're going to get to that. But in case anybody who is joining us hasn't read the book, I was wondering if you would share it with us, if you would feel comfortable reading us the story.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. Thank you for the super warm welcome. I am really excited to be here. And we can certainly start off with a reading. It should take probably a little less than 10 minutes. So we can jump right in and then come back and chat about it. All right. Okay, so this is my book, Fatima's Great Outdoors. I'm reading, the text is a little small, so I'm reading from a screen here, but I'm right here with you. So Fatima and her appa stood at the curb and waited for their parents to pick them up from school. Today, they weren't going straight home. Today, the Ghazi family was going camping for the first time. Camping, her father had told them over dinner in his teaching voice, was a great American pastime. The trip felt like Fatima's reward after a long, hard week. On Monday, some kids wrinkled their noses at her lunch. On Tuesday, someone in class laughed and told her it's pronounced fractions, not fractions. On Wednesday, a boy pulled her long braid in the hallway. And on Thursday, she didn't do so well on her math quiz. Fatima smiled when her parents pulled up. The sisters piled into the car, squeezing in between pillows, blankets, and a big cardboard box filled with cooking supplies. Wow, this is a lot of stuff, Fatima yelled. Are we moving to the forest? Mama asked the girls in Urdu if they were excited as she reached back to hand them warm homemade samosas. The girls nodded vigorously with jack-o'-lantern smiles. Mama samosas always tasted extra delicious on road trips. How about some Ghani? Papa asked. Muhammad Rafi's voice rose from the car speakers and Bollywood songs spilled out of the windows. Fatima's cares melted away as they all sang along in Hindi. Appa shouted over the music and announced to the whole car how well she had done on her math homework. Appa's teacher even asked her to come to the front of the class and solve a hard problem on the board that most of the other kids had gotten wrong. Shabash, Papa said with pride. Appa went on and on about school. Fatima slumped in her seat and ate another samosa. As Fatima thought about how to change the topic, her big sister pointed out the window and shouted, "Look, we're here." The family cheered as they passed the sign for the state park. At the campsite, the girls helped their parents unload. First, Papa said, we must build our tent. Appa and Mama chose to start dinner instead. Fatima watched as Papa took the tent gear out of the sack. Papa grumbled in Urdu when the pieces wouldn't fit. Fatima wanted to help, but could she? She hadn't done anything right at school that week. What would make the campground any different? Fatima took a tiny step closer. She suggested to Papa that they read the instruction manual together. When they finished, Fatima stood proudly next to their brand new home in the forest. Shabash, Papa's bear paw clapped her shoulder. The Qazi family celebrated the start of their first camping trip over a delicious dinner of shami kebab and rotis that Mama had brought from home. After dinner, Fatima and Appa crawled into the family tent. They were so excited to snooze in their new sleeping bags. They never had rooms of their own, not even in India, so being together in one big tent felt cozy and right. The girls zipped up their sleeping bags and chattered on as their parents finished cleaning up. Appa was telling Fatima about how she had won her class spelling bee when suddenly her face dropped. She gasped and pointed to the ceiling. 8 long, giant legs gripped the outside of their tent. A monster, the girls screamed and huddled together. They cried out for Mama. She was fearless and would know what to do. When they lived in India, Mama would catch the lizards and throw them out without flinching. That's why she had that funny finger, Appa said. She had been getting rid of a scorpion from her house when it stung her. The monster moved across the roof and the girls screamed again. What's going on? Mama shouted over the sound of dishes being washed. The Qazis didn't use paper plates because they were too expensive. Mama, don't open the tent, Appa yelled. There's a giant poisonous spider monster outside. Don't be silly. It's tiny, Mama replied impatiently. Go brush your teeth before bed. Mama held the tent door flaps, and on the count of 3, the girls ran out. They followed the same precautions coming back inside. 1, 2, 3. They zoomed into their sleeping bags in a single fluid motion. That night, Fatima had a hard time falling asleep. Crickets chirped and wind blew against their tent. She flinched every time a twig snapped. But soon, as the tree swayed outside, Fatima's eyes got heavy and she drifted into a warm, deep sleep that only campers enjoy. Soft snores drifted outside the Qazi's tent and joined the sounds of the forest. The next morning, Fatima woke up to the smell of anda and roti cooking in ghee. Papa was waiting for her to make the bacon over a roaring fire. He had promised Fatima they could have bacon for breakfast just like the other American families. They had even made a special trip to the halal butcher shop for the beef kind. Bahar aa jao, Papa called for them to come outside. The sisters crept out slowly. Mama pointed at the top of the tent between chuckles. Go look at your big monster, she said. A harmless little daddy longlegs sat quietly between beads of morning dew. It had been guarding them from mosquitoes all night. The girls laughed and laughed. Mama and Papa laughed too. Fatima was pretty sure the spider joined in as well. Let's start the campfire so we can make the smoky bacon you've been so excited about, Fatima, Papa said. 20 minutes later, there still was no campfire. Papa grumbled under his breath in Urdu. The fire wouldn't catch. Fatima looked around at the other families' campsites and they all had roaring fires. Why couldn't theirs look like that? Why did Fatima's family always have to be so different? She pouted and kicked rocks. Papa kept spraying lighter fluid on the logs. The fire would scream for a second and then it would be gone. Mama came over to see what all the fuss was about. She shook her head and clicked her teeth in disapproval the way Fatima's aunties did. That's not how you start a fire. Let me show you, she said. A fire, like strength, takes patience to build. She made the girls gather twigs and dry leaves for kindling, then bigger sticks for tinder. Unlike Papa, who grew up in the big cities in India, Mama came from a small town where they had to use wood-burning stove outside to make chai when they ran out of gas for the inside stove. Fatima remembered visiting her Nani's house and helping one morning. Mama showed Fatima how to use a long metal pipe to breathe oxygen into the fire. That's how it comes alive, she had said. Fatima remembered that when it was her turn, she'd blown a giant puff of air into the fire, but no one told her not to inhale right after. She got a mouthful of smoke and started coughing. Her cousins had howled with laughter at the city girl. Well, now you know, Mama had said, rubbing Fatima's back as she coughed. Fatima smiled at that memory and watched wide-eyed as Mama blew life into the campfire. Though Fatima hadn't built the fire herself, now she knew how. As the Qazi family packed up, Fatima's heart felt heavy. I'm so sad, she told Appa. I don't want to go home. Home meant no laughing around the campfire or telling funny stories from India. Home meant no long road trips with fresh samosas and Bollywood sing-alongs in the car. Home meant taking tests, doing homework, getting in trouble, and being teased at school. Home meant Mama and Papa would be tired again from working long hours and 2 jobs each. Fatima looked at the tall trees and the big blue sky and the imprints in the dirt where their tent used to stand. Being outdoors reminded her of how she used to feel in India. She had fun, she didn't feel sad or scared, and she loved how adventure was around every corner. At the campground, Fatima felt like a superhero. But now she had to leave it all behind. Appa rubbed Fatima's back and said, "Don't worry, we'll be back soon. Remember, you can share all this at show and tell." Fatima returned to school with stories of her great outdoors. "Guess what?" she asked her classmates. "I'm a superhero. I have lots of superpowers. I can build fires and tents, and I'm not afraid of spider monsters." Fatima beamed as she thought about what the Qazi family's next camping adventure would hold. The end.
Thank you so much for that, Ambreen. It's beautiful to hear it in your own voice, because I think what some of the people joining us today, some of the children joining us today might not know is that this story is really your story, your personal story. And Fatima's experiences as an immigrant, as a student struggling with math, as someone with parents with high expectations, and someone who just fell in love with the great outdoors, on your first camping trip. That really is a large part of you and has shaped a lot of your life. Do you want to talk and share with us more about that?
Absolutely. You said it so well, Tara, that, this is my story. From beginning to end, all of these events happened. They didn't exactly happen in this sort of beginning to end story. They're different snippets of my childhood and my experience in the outdoors. But they all certainly happened. And at the essence of it, the hardships that Fatima is going through, the struggles of, you know, questioning her self-worth, the transition from being a happy, well-adjusted kid back home to suddenly being out of place in every way, all of these things are sort of part and parcel with my immigrant experience as a child, but also witnessing my parents go through it, what it meant to see them take a moment of joy. And a big part of, I think, why I fell in love with the outdoors is how my family felt in it, right? Moving to another country and going through all the transitions of being sort of struggling immigrants, every part of our life was sort of steeped in stress, right? Whether it was socializing, whether it was going to school, whether it was learning how the mosque works here, all of these different things. But for a moment, when we did stumble into the outdoors and we started to discover it in this way through camping, which we knew nothing about, you really see Fatima watching her family enjoy themselves. And then Fatima and her sister really are children again for the first time in a very long time, right? They're allowed to just be curious. They're allowed to tell scary stories. They're allowed to explore and be children in a way that a lot of immigrant kids don't get to, because they're either helping their family or they're maneuvering the world. And so that's a big part of the story that I really wanted to share, that me, as in Fatima, fell in love with the outdoors, not just because of how beautiful and adventurous it is, but it's also such a special place for a family to find joy together, for your parents to feel like adventurers again, and to be curious together and have a joyful experience.
I'm so glad that you put it that way, and phrased it as just pure joy, because that's what comes across in your book. And whenever you talk about your work, and it's just, I think what is so vivid in this story too is your family. You've captured that 8-year-old girl and all of the pressures that you're feeling, you know, and the fact that you couldn't be a kid and you really want to be. And then, you know, your parents trying to acclimate as well, and your sister, and just, it's just so beautifully done. And I just read this and thought to myself, I want to know about their second camping trip and their third camping trip. And I was wondering if you would share any memories of those as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So to this day, I feel like every time I go outdoors, and I've camped in all sorts of different ways, right? I've done backpacking, I've done backcountry. Car camping has always been my favorite type of camping because it involves food and it involves cooking, and it allows me to feel luxurious in the outdoors in the sort of perfect balance that I really enjoy. And it brings together community that I also really enjoy. And so as we did a few more camping trips, the food got better. My mom would cook more at the campsite versus bringing cooked food there. My sister and I began to explore the outdoors. Eventually, we started renting the bikes at the campsites, because at least in Minnesota, the campsites are really sort of like these bustling communities where you can rent bikes and you can rent different equipment and you can explore, because there's always a lake. It's a land of 1,000 lakes, right? So we gained more confidence in the outdoors, and certainly we learned how to build a fire. But to this day, every time I build a fire, there is always a new challenge that I have to overcome. And I always find that to be exciting and empowering, like the wind is blowing in a different direction, or the wood is wet, or the wood is stale, or it just won't catch and I can't figure out why. And I think that resonates with my childhood experiences as well. But what's really important is that the way I experienced the outdoors as a child is that it was opened up to me and I was cared for by adults. But as an adult, going into the outdoors is such a completely different experience, and it's empowering in such a different way, because it's about me. It's about me taking care of myself. It's about how much I can push myself and my comfort level. And I really love switching up the roles now and introducing people into the outdoors and making them feel comfortable in however they want to experience it. and really sort of instilling that in friends and family, that it doesn't have to be extreme. It can be whatever you want it to be, as long as you're respecting nature. And so it's just been a really special experience.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I love, as someone who sometimes will do a picnic and not do the full camping experience, that absolutely is true. As your connection to nature, even as we walk around the city, which I'll ask you more about more in a minute, hopefully. You know, it's there, and it can become a part of your life in such a special way. And I will add too, one of the things that I love is, this reminded me as a child so much of learning about your parents as you're growing up. So your father,
Yes.
lighting and then seeing, your mother, just pure comfort with that. And as a child, seeing my parents do things like that too, where and learning about them, and your mom with the spiders and everything, like, and it really is one of those things as a child where you're getting to know it on that level, and you're still figuring out who you are within your family, that I can imagine that as an adult, it is something very different. And then I love the fact that you're sharing it with others.
And I love that you pointed that out, because, each character in this book isn't just a character, it's based on the four of us. It's always been the four of us. And they're all based on my real family members. And it's true that now I have this understanding and perspective of my parents as individuals, right? Like, why is my father the way he is? He grew up in a city. He was part of an urban community in India, whereas my mom grew up in different places because my grandfather was stationed in the Air Force, and she was in a lot of rural spaces and spaces that gave her outdoor skills that very much translated into the outdoors in the way we enjoy it in the United States. And what's funny is that a lot of people have reached out to me and said that particular memory about my father trying to just spray lighter fluid onto the campfire is something so hilarious and heartwarming, because so many other people can relate to it. Apparently, a lot of dads do that and get angry as the fire blows out, which is exactly the point of this book, right? Like, right. Even though it is about my family, I really wanted this to be such a universally experienced story, because I know friends of different cultures bring their own food when their families went out. And I know that not everybody has fire building skills or knew how to set up a tent, and the kind of frustration and comedy that comes out of doing a project with your family is something that I think is universally funny and heartwarming, while also bringing in its own adventure. And I think all of us, no matter where we're from, can identify with that. And like trying to politely say, Dad, why don't we read this instead?
Exactly. Yeah, definitely, while you're putting up the tent. Yeah. So taking such a personal story and turning it into a book, I can imagine that there were certain elements of your life and memories of experience, and being true to your Fab Four family, that you wanted to see. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, and I love that, the Fab Four. I think they will love that as well. Something that, every family has their own culture and their own identity. My family, ever since we moved here, has been really proud of where we came from, proud of the struggle, proud of instilling it in us. But not everybody in my family is a storyteller. Not everybody is comfortable sharing the details of our humble beginnings, And so as I launched into this second job, passion project of storytelling to promote, diversity in the outdoors, because I wanted to share personal narratives to sort of explore what these issues are, I really have had to explore what are the boundaries of the other people in my stories. While I'm trying to share my story and my experience and my struggle, it inevitably touches on other people in my life. And so, in writing a children's book, there's so much to balance in levity and joy, but also being serious and trying to explain what the struggles were. So for me, it was really important to drive home Fatima's experience, because that's one I can speak to 100%, and I have the permission to delve into her character and her life. What I really wanted to get across with Fatima's character was that going, adjusting to a new country, she really does go from a very happy-go-lucky kid to suddenly being sad, having anxiety, having depression, suddenly questioning herself because of all these new standards that she didn't have to live up to before. And that's something I really want kids to sort of think about and identify with, because that can happen even in a domestic move. But also when you're coming from a different culture, it happens with the shifting of language and customs and things of that sort. But the point that I wanted to drive home with Fatima is that while she's struggling with these things, because she's not able to live up to the expectations of her parents, thinking about the sacrifices they've made, and her sister, who she actually has a great relationship with, right? The character, I really wanted to show a positive sister relationship, because that is how it is. It came naturally to my sister to excel in school. It wasn't her being boastful. She wasn't showing off. It just so happened that when she does share stories, they happen to be of success in school. And she's not trying to rub it in Fatima's face, but it becomes more and more difficult for Fatima to find what she is proud about within her family and school. So being in the outdoors suddenly, she says, I don't know if I'll be able to do anything. I couldn't do anything right in school. What makes this place any different? And so really that's the turning point in the story of Fatima taking ownership of her confidence and learning that, just because I didn't do well in my math test, just because I may be getting in trouble in different ways, doesn't mean that that's who I am. That doesn't define me wholly. And that's really what I want families and kids and even just grown adults to get, because that's what I've learned in the outdoors, that while I have struggled with different things in life, when I am outdoors, I define my boundaries, I define empowerment, I define success, and I meet challenges I never thought I would. So that was a huge point of the character's journey that was important for me to emphasize, because nobody is defined by other people's expectations. And when you're in the outdoors, that really comes across in your accomplishments.
And you actually just answered my next question, which was going to be, what advice or what thoughts would you share with someone going through some of the same experiences that Fatima is? And as you said, it's really finding that thing that you love, and we hope it might be nature, but and really, making that your own in so many ways.
That's a huge, so the work that I do through Brown People Camping and talking about diversity and accessibility in the outdoors, that's a very large part of that mission, is promoting people, encouraging people to be curious in nature. You don't have to mimic what everybody else is doing. There's such an intimidation factor, is I have to have this gear, I have to do it in this way, I have to hit these many miles. And a big part of this book is to say, do it your own way. Eat your shami kebab. You don't have to have hot dogs. You don't need to know how to set up a tent to hit the trail or get to the campsite. Do it your own way. Be curious, define your own adventure. And that's really what it's about. That's really what finding joy in the outdoors is about, is finding it your own way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what is it about the outdoors that specifically speaks to you? Like, is it, my sister's a birder. She absolutely loves birding. I love the smells of the shore, the sounds of the wind in the trees. What is it for you that just captures your heart?
Everything that you said, the closeness to nature in a way that we don't experience it in our civilized life in the cities or in towns. The sounds, the smells, the closeness to natural elements in a way where they haven't been paved for us. But especially what I enjoy in the outdoors is the feeling of vulnerability. To me, no matter what you do in the outdoors, it is defined by an activity that makes something that you do on a normal basis difficult and dependent on your labor. So whether it's hiking, whether it's fishing, whether it's camping, you're taking away something that you can go to the store and get, or flip a switch and get, or get in a car and get to a destination. You're putting it back on yourself. And that humility that comes with, oh my God, I'm cold, and the only way I can get warm is by putting up this tent and getting into that sleeping bag and building up my own body heat. The humility that comes with something so simple that you take for granted. Or light, you know, the sun has set and I need light, and I need to build a fire for that light. The things that you take for granted in getting, if you are privileged enough to live in a place where you get clean water out of a tap, all of these things are challenged and are gone, and push you to think about how privileged you are in your everyday life. No matter where you are, where you come from, the ability to choose that activity gives you a level of privilege to reflect and say, I am so grateful for my privileges. And that feeling, to me, that humility, that vulnerability, is always ironically very empowering. It makes me feel not only grateful for my everyday life, and that I don't want to be sleeping in a tent every day, right? Or not only am I grateful for learning how to find this, but I'm truly grateful that we have formed society and have labored together to bring these things. And for those who don't have it, even more passion to promote access.
And, and I think it's so important at this point too, to mention your work as an activist and an advocate, because not everyone feels the privilege of being a part of nature. Certainly as someone who is white, I enjoy a privilege that other people, persons of color, may not. And there's personal histories there. There's also systemic histories there. Please talk about your work as an advocate and an activist, because it is so incredibly vital to.
Thank you.
So many levels.
Thank you for acknowledging that. Yeah. So the first thing I usually share when I share my family story is that while we were struggling immigrants, and I really wanted to get that point across, my parents had to work 2 jobs. We had different obstacles and difficulties, but we still had a level of privilege that allowed them to put aside enough cash to buy that tent and to buy a couple of sleeping bags for the girls, and to be able to take that day off on the weekend, because my parents worked weekends. They worked graveyard shifts, right? Like, not every kid has to learn what that term means, but nonetheless, we still had the privilege of knowing English coming to this country, or having even the confidence to maneuver a wild space like that. And those are things that a lot of us take for granted. And those are things that not everybody can access or have the confidence to explore. So it was important to me to show Fatima's family in how they experienced life, which was with struggles and with certain privileges. And that's really what Brown People Camping is about, my storytelling initiative. It's to talk about the fact that there are disparities in accessing the outdoors and why that matters. That matters because in our country and even the world, our demographics are changing. In the United States, in a couple of decades, there are going to be more people of color, more BIPOC folks than white folks. But what's not keeping up in those demographics are the numbers in our environmental organizations, stewardship groups, Parks and Rec, people even on the trails. Those are still staying predominantly white. The reason that's a problem is that we're not getting enough people out there. We're not making enough people feel welcome out there to fall in love with nature, who will then stand up and protect it in the coming years. That's where we are seeing a pretty alarming future, is if you don't love something, and if you haven't experienced it, and it's an abstraction somewhere far away for somebody else, how will you fall in love with it and then fight for it? For me, I had a very novelty experience. We stumbled into it. And for that reason, it formed a very special love in my heart at a very formative time in my childhood. And that will always stay precious to me. But not every kid is going to have an experience of forming a precious bond with nature and then wanting to defend it, wanting to protect it, not only for myself, but for other people to experience. So it's really important to talk about that. It's also very important to talk about why does the outdoors look the way it does? Why are certain communities uncomfortable and feel unsafe being in the outdoors? In this work that I've done over the years, I have learned so much about what it means to be an ally, what it means to learn other people's stories, and why do landscapes exist the way they do, right? And I have learned so much about the African-American experience and how treacherous the outdoors was for a community that was forced to come to this land, work this land, denied this land, and then Jim Crow era. I mean, the national park system or public lands in themselves didn't just appear out of thin air. They were taken from a community whose land it was, Native and Indigenous people, forcefully, violently. And then there were borders formed around those public lands that did not allow people who were not white to come and enjoy it. So for a lot of, like, the woods represented really scary things, and bad things happened to Black people in the woods in the Jim Crow era, right? We also talk about sundown towns, what it means to be in a rural space that openly doesn't welcome people of color. How likely were you to develop a generational love for camping in the backwoods when that was straight up dangerous? I've learned a lot about different cultural experiences in the outdoors in the United States, from Native Indigenous communities to African-American communities. And what I speak about is my experience as an immigrant, that third big bucket in the American experience, the immigrants who come here. And you see this through Fatima's family, who is looking around, we are observing, and we are trying to fit in this very uncomfortable way. But what ends up happening is that they learn they are very comfortable with their culture fitting into the outdoors. You don't have to fit in and do what all the other American families are doing. You see that with her love for bacon and wanting to eat bacon just like everybody else. What ended up happening is that they defined it in their own way. We got it from the butcher store. We don't eat pork. So we found our own way of experiencing our traditions, creating new traditions, melding new traditions. And that's really the point of this story, is that while you have this feeling, whether it's childhood or the immigrant experience, you just want to fit in, you want to do what everybody else is doing. But what you end up finding is that what gives you joy is finding your own authentic way in foreign spaces.
Yeah. Beautifully put. And I'm so glad after that question and then your answer,
it's a mouthful.
that you are fighting this fight because it's so important. So I want to ask you one more question before we start getting to audience questions, and I'll bring our friend Brandy Rose back over from Politics and Prose. But it is so important in literature, particularly children's literature, to see ourselves, to see a character that we identify with. And I'm so glad that you have written this book and that it's published and your publisher's imprint is working on that, because it has been underrepresented. Persons of color have been underrepresented in so much in the publishing world. So I'm curious what it feels like to be a part of that. But I'm also really curious what you read as a kid where you saw yourself reflected back, if there was anything in particular or not.
So a lot, growing up in India, a very post-colonial country, you know, a lot of our school system is very still British based. I remember as a child in India having to memorize nursery rhymes that are traditionally British. We didn't necessarily have children's stories that represented us. And that's such a big part of the sort of the post-colonial politics of it, which we won't get into here. But in the United States, my sister and I were avid readers, because part of that was, you know, our parents would be building resumes, applying for jobs, or whether it was taking classes or learning things. So much of our childhood was spent in a public library. And so while my parents were doing their hustle and they were grinding and they were learning how to look things up, my sister and I would be sitting in the children's book section, just reading and reading and reading. I don't remember any books that I identified with in any way. But I was also a child that had no expectation of that, and there was no precedent for it. And that's such a big part also of the immigrant experience. A lot of what we talk about now as advocates, even culturally, we want people to be empowered as individuals. But what we don't talk about is the reality, which is when I came here, I just accepted things the way they were. My family was like, this is how it's done, this is how we will do it. You know, and it's now as an adult who has benefited from the privileges of the public school system, finding empowerment myself, that I can say, this is how it felt, but it doesn't have to feel that way. We can ask ourselves, why don't we see ourselves in our literature or in the history that we're studying in school or in the media that I'm looking at? It's now with this empowerment that I can say that and I can advocate for that. But because I have vivid memories as a child, having zero expectation of that, because I just thought this is their country, and how wrong that is now for me. And I am so blessed and privileged to have been proven wrong in that way, and the education that's come with learning about the historic communities in this country. So the answer to that is a negative, but very positive in so many ways.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we're glad you're a part of making it positive moving forward. All right, so I am dying also to know about your favorite DC spots that you recommend for hiking, walking, barbecuing, and all of that. But I really want to get to our questions from the audience, and so
Yes.
Brandy, let's join us. And if we have a moment at the end, maybe we can do that. But let's see what the audience wants to know.
Well, it just so happens we do have a question about that. So let me find that question because we can move right into that topic. I know I saw it somewhere. Katie G had a question about your favorite camping spots, and are there any favorite national parks? So maybe you can launch into that now and tell us a little bit about some of your favorite places to camp, either locally or nationally.
I think that's a fantastic question. I love exploring that question, no matter how experienced you are. If you love the outdoors, you love telling people where to go in the outdoors, right? Like, we like to share the things that we love if we are outdoor lovers. So I will start locally. I'm a huge fan of local city, state parks. And I always like to tout them because folks do such hard work to maintain those trails. And the local history of who that land used to belong to is so special, and you can actually experience it and go there and learn about those tribes and communities. My favorite place to hike in the DC area is Rock Creek. I absolutely love Rock Creek. I love the Rock Creek Conservancy and all the work that they do. It's such a special trail to me because, one, it's accessible. It's accessible by public transportation. It cuts through our city, and it's beautiful in every season, fall being my favorite. The entire park is on fire. It's golden. And it's such a special trail to me because of all the places I've lived throughout the DMV, I've always found a way to get to it. And so that's my favorite place to hike. But there are, between DC, Maryland, Virginia, we have over 100 state parks, right? So the landscapes change so much just within hours. I never stop emphasizing my love for Assateague Island. I am a huge fan of the Chesapeake Bay. I'm a huge fan of Chincoteague and Assateague, which are islands off of the coast of Maryland and Virginia. Also very special because they have wild horses there, along with just so many different types of birds and wildlife that are special to the Chesapeake Bay. But the horses themselves are really special. There's a book that kids all over the country have read. My niece just read it, and I told her that that place does exist. It's called Misty of Chincoteague. And she was telling me about this book, and I said, you know, that's a real place. And, you know, I go there every year, and it just absolutely blew her mind. And so it's such a special place, I think, for families, for kids, anybody who loves the outdoors, because it's unique. It's a white sand beach, but at the same time, there are these wild horses there who none of us fully agree on in the local area how they got there. Everybody has different theories, but it's just a lovely place.
How wonderful. I know I need to plan a trip out there soon. Do you have like a dream? If you could camp anywhere in the world, is there somewhere that you would just love to someday visit?
Oh my gosh. You know, I'm a big proponent of loving your local parks, especially because these big, beautiful dream trips take money and time. I've often thought about how I don't know when I'll get to make it out to Alaska, right? There are these amazing, beautiful parks in Alaska that my heart it just fills with joy when I see them. But even if I was to save up enough money to get the ticket and get out there, the amount of time it takes to get to Alaska and come back, I don't have enough leave from work. So I think about that a lot. The world is filled with beautiful places. I love the Southwest. I just really love the red dirt and the desert in our Southwest. I also really love the Pacific Northwest, which is foggy and beautiful and moody. And so it's hard for me to say where my dream place would be. I guess that would depend on my budget, but wherever I go, I'm going to find joy. Much closer by, I love Shenandoah. I can't wait to get out to Acadia, which is also within reach for us in the Northeast. I actually haven't been there yet, but there's also these sort of local treasures that I celebrate, like sort of like really locally loved things like Assateague and the Pony Migration, or in the Great Smokies, there's a very specific time you can go there and watch the mating season of fireflies. And apparently it's like, nobody can truly photograph it because they're fireflies and they're all around you and it's completely magical. Those are the things I sort of aspire for, like those very magical moments that only locals know, because big, beautiful landscapes, I just can't get enough of them. I really can't.
Oh, you're so inspiring. We are very lucky to live where we are for sure. There's some questions about some of your favorite elements of nature. Rita asks what flower you saw was your favorite, and then I think somebody else had a question about. I think she also had a question about your favorite animal. What are some of the favorite things that you've observed? You mentioned the horses. What are some other favorite things you've observed while you were in nature?
One thing that I realized is I have always wanted a great outdoors dog. I've never had a good dog. I love my dogs to death, but I've never really had a good dog, a dog that respects me and listens to me. When I first got a dog, I thought dogs just naturally love the outdoors. And I remember taking her, she was a small Dachshund, and I remember taking her to go camping for the first time. I didn't even cross my mind that she would stay up all night listening to every sound around her, not sleep, and not be an off-leash dog when I wanted her to be, because I'd always seen people with well-trained dogs in the outdoors that were off-leash. So while people may expect me to say some great wild animal that I saw, the animals I admire most that I see in the outdoors are people's well-trained dogs. Who, I mean, to think about being able to train your dog out of a prey drive and chasing a squirrel, all of these things have happened. I still keep bringing my dogs outdoors because it's such a special experience to hike with a dog. But that is probably my most favorite animal that I see outdoors. Other than that, I really love seeing the birds in the Chesapeake Bay. And once upon a time when I was in the Southwest, I got to see wild rams, bighorn sheep in the Southwest, which are a protected animal now. And it was just, there's just something about seeing wildlife in a place where we have agreed to keep wild that is just magical. And it really helps you assess what's important to you and how much you want to respect that space and what we've done to wipe out some of these species. And you can't help but think about the larger picture when it comes to wildlife and the respect that we have to maintain, especially with bears, right? Like, not every animal that you're going to come across in the outdoors is just like this novelty safari. There's very real threats with animals that we've built barriers against in our civilized life. Learning about bears and the protection against bears, the things that we have to do in the outdoors to keep them away from us. This is very, very real, especially in Shenandoah, especially out west, because we have removed barriers in nature and we have made animals accustomed to coming up to us and eating our food. And that is not good for them, and that is not good for us. So there's a sort of whole range of experiencing animals in the outdoors that I really love. I could talk about it for days.
Well, Melanie has shared that her 7-year-old daughter hopes that she really liked the book and thought it was very interesting. And she wants to know if you still like camping. I definitely think that you do. I'm going to pair that with another question from Sam, who asks if you have any big camping trips coming up this summer.
I love camping. I think one of the things I love about being an outdoors lover is I never feel like an expert. I don't know if that's just me and my sort of imposter syndrome I've dealt with my whole life, but I've also met a lot of other fantastic outdoors women, men, however you identify, who in loving the outdoors, being humble about it is just part of who you are. I never feel like I have learned fully anything. And so I do love camping, and there's so many different ways to do it. There's people who have turned their vans into campers. There are people who have rooftop tents. You can like just fully put up a tent on top of your car, and that's luxury in itself, or RVs, or backcountry camping, or long distance hiking. I mean, there's just so many ways to do it that it'll never be a time when I've actually experienced all of them. So to me, it's not just that I love going outdoors. I love learning different ways to experience it. I went snowshoeing for the first time last winter, and I was like, oh my goodness, I can cover so much more ground in snowshoes than I could just walking. Like, you move so much faster, and it makes you think about the communities that invented different ways to experience the outdoors, right? Because when it snows, the trails are gone. They're just gone. There's nobody there to like shovel the snow. And so I remember as a child in Minnesota learning about the tribes, the native communities, and how they used to snowshoe to different places, and then trying it out myself. It makes you experience not only the land, but also people in different places of this country and the world and how they explored it too. And it gives you a different connection to people and places. So I love it. And I forgot the second question.
Do you have any trips planned, or any camping trips planned for the summer?
So the way I can list off a billion places that I love that I've been to, and it would seem as though I'm a very well-traveled person. What I actually do is when I have to travel for work, whether it's a conference or if I have to go to a wedding, I will always try and plan out 2 extra days and go to the nearest national park or state park. And that's how I get to places. That's how I've been to New Mexico. That's how I've been to Wyoming. I would never on my own be able to afford a whole trip around those things. But that's something I really like to suggest to families and working people is you can blend things together when you have obligations that take you out, right? You can always look up whether you're using the app or asking locals. I always just ask, what's your favorite park around here? Where do you go to hike? And you find so many local gems that way. So last year, because of COVID, work travel was shut down for me. And that pushed me to focus so much more on local exploration, which is why I'm such a huge fan of all the different parks around the Chesapeake Bay. But this year I'm planning on heading out to Montana because I have a work trip getting out there, and I'm going to go there a couple days early. And I have always wanted to go out to Montana. So I am so excited. I just hope I get authorization to travel.
Oh, I hope so too. That sounds amazing. Mona is asking, how can those of us who are passionate about inclusivity in the outdoors do more to support brown people camping?
Yeah, so I think that's an excellent question, Mona. Thank you for asking it. One, I always say that I am not the only one by far talking about these issues. There have been people who've been doing this long before me, long after me, and I'm just one person in a very large movement that's talking about issues of diversity, accessibility, justice, and equity in the outdoors. when it comes to so many different communities, not just BIPOC, not just people of color, Black people, Indigenous, Native communities. There's also issues about accessibility when it comes to folks with disabilities. There's also issues about body positivity, gear not fitting people's bodies because we refuse to acknowledge them, right? So there are folks who are doing really amazing things that are making it easier and more joyful to be in the outdoors. So because my project is really based in social media, I would say you can always start there if you're comfortable with social media. That in itself has given me such a great platform to connect with people I've never met before. I feel stronger and more empowered as a woman having met and connected and become friends with women who are outdoor enthusiasts. Like it helped me create a community that I had been looking for my whole life, but was never able to find physically. There's a power to that. And it's sort of ironic because we think of social media as inherently antisocial. But for me and for so many others, it's allowed us to build and feel a sense of community that just didn't exist. And it's real. So I would say start by looking at these groups. And these groups are inherently about building community. They're about embracing folks who don't feel at home or out of place, or even if you do, it's about celebrating the fact that you've been out there and you've been doing it and you've overcome barriers to get out there and stay out there. There are so many different experiences and narratives, and there are communities to celebrate that. So I would say start with that, connect with. A lot of us use hashtags of each other within the movement to build those stories out and see representation. So I would say you can look at that. But more than anything, it's important to talk about it, right? This old narrative of I don't see color, these issues don't exist, it's uncomfortable and rude to talk about it. That's only true if you're white, because for the rest of us, we live it, right? I see color because I am of color, and I love it. I love seeing other people's cultures and other people's colors. I actually don't see it as a bad thing, so it's not uncomfortable to me. It's really important that we dismantle the silence around these issues. The first thing we should all be doing is talking about it, asking questions. And the second thing is to understand that we are all allies. I am an ally to someone else as someone else is an ally to me. So to understand that we are all learning about others and we all have a role to play in advocating for others just as much as the outdoors. The outdoors doesn't exist in a vacuum. Like a mountain is beautiful, but it existed in relationship to people and people's stories and people's land. And it's really important that if you love that mountain and you love looking at it, you also love people who've made sacrifices for you to be able to enjoy that view.
One last question from me. Ambreen, it's so impressive that you have written and published your first children's book. Do you think there might be more in the future?
I sure hope so. I never thought I would. And this is where I get to really plug the team behind this book. You know, I've been writing my whole life ever since I was a kid. I've kept these journals that I used to write in, not as a journal, but I would write stories and poetry and prose. But I've never written for children, and I have such a great appreciation for children's writers and children's literature, because it is extremely difficult to take all of these really big, complicated issues that we take for granted in speaking with our peers about and try and convert them into a language that's still whimsical for children to enjoy and learn something from. It is an absolute skill. I wrote pages upon pages of narratives that are now turned into this text that I had to boil down. And it's been a really, really incredible and educational process for me. It's also Stevie Lewis, the illustrator, who is an absolutely incredible artist, who has brought to life, and this was so surreal to me to imagine things in my mind and be able to talk with someone and have that artist bring to life memories of my childhood. We worked closely in finessing the details of each character that you see. She drew storyboards upon storyboards for us to finesse the shape of my father's nose or the texture of Fatima's hair. All of these things go into the details of these stories, and it is mind-blowing how hard people work behind the scenes on all of these things. This book took over 2 years to make, which I would have never thought of because I have no experience in this world. But my team specifically in Penguin, Cocula, the imprint, they approached me to write this book. They saw a vision in the writing I was doing in op-eds and different things where I was illustrating these memories to make a point about accessibility and diversity issues. They saw in that an image of a book for children, and it had never crossed my mind, but I appreciate their vision so much because we oftentimes say no to ourselves before we let the world shut the door on us, right? So they saw it, they came with a yes, and I went along with it. And their vision of promoting multiculturalism and diverse stories is so critical for children's literature. And I really have so much respect for them, and I have loved working with them for that reason.
It's amazing. Well, you have a wonderful voice for children's writing. So we hope that we will see you again on our shelves. I just want to thank both of you again for such a wonderful presentation. And Ambreen, thank you for sharing so much about your life experiences, and we can really see your passion for this work. And thank you, viewers, for those great questions. You can still click on the link in the chat to purchase your copy of Fatima's Great Outdoors. I also saw that we added a link for Miss Fee of Chincoteague if you'd like to also look at that book. We've got a link to purchase that on our website as well. You can learn about other upcoming events in the Children and Teens Department on our website, which is politics-pros.com. Just click on the Children and Teens tab and then click events for a calendar of upcoming events. Hi, puppy. Oh, you are so well behaved. Even if you're not outdoorsy, an outdoorsy dog. You can also view past events on our YouTube channel. So we hope you'll check that out, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you again, everyone. It's been fantastic. Ambreen, what's your dog's name?
This is Bear, and he's 10
Bear.
years old, and he was adopted from the PG County Animal Shelter. What?
Oh,
Best animal shelter in the area.
Fantastic. All right, everyone, thanks for joining us. We'll see you again soon. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.